Hello lovelies! Autumn has arrived, sweater weather is here, and that means it's time to get into the kitchen for some fall baking. Today we are going to be making this absolutely divine apple fritter loaf. It's essentially a cake that tastes like an apple fritter, and it is so good and so easy to make. Now, if you are looking for more dessert inspiration just like this, be sure to check out my latest ebook, Desserts Made Easy. It's full of all sorts of awesome baking inspiration. You can find it on my website, thedomesticgeek.com, or linked in the description box. Now, without further ado, let's talk about today's recipe that was inspired by a recent trip to the apple orchard with my kiddos. I bring them apple picking every year. It's become a bit of a tradition. And of course, we always end up with more apples than we know what to do with. And that's why I need to do all the apple baking I can. And this apple fritter bread is just too delicious not to share. Now, it happens in several steps, but they're all really, really simple. And when this comes together, trust me, all of your effort will be rewarded. Now, the first step here is just gonna be mixing up a really yummy brown sugar cinnamon mixture. So, as that suggests, I have some brown sugar in my bowl. And to that, I'm going to add a little bit of cinnamon. And I'm just gonna mix this up until it's well combined, and then I can set it aside until I'm ready to assemble my bread. If you are looking for the measurements of the ingredients that I use in my videos, remember, I always link the full recipe just below the video in the description box so you can follow along in your own kitchen. Next, it's time to mix up our dry ingredients. So in my bowl, I have got some all-purpose flour, and to that I'm going to be adding some baking powder as well as a little bit of salt. Then I'm just gonna get in here with my whisk and mix this all up so that baking powder is incorporated throughout. Now we can set this one aside while we work on our wet ingredients. So in my bowl, I have got some butter that I've brought to room temperature, and to that I'm going to add some sugar. I'm going to use my hand mixer to beat that up until it's nice and light and fluffy. Next, I'm gonna go ahead and add some milk to this, as well as 2 eggs and a nice big splash of vanilla extract. Vanilla extract, of course, just makes everything taste so much better. My final step is just gonna be shaking my dry ingredients into my wet ingredients. I'll get in there for one more big mix, and what I end up with is this really delicious cake batter. Yummy, nothing better than some batter. All right, I'm gonna set this aside and work on the final step just before assembling, and that is preparing my apples. Of course, you always wanna wait to prepare your apples until you're ready to assemble your loaf because you don't want your apples to brown. Now, to prepare the apples for this recipe is really simple. We're just going to peel our apples. I'm using Granny Smith here, but you could pretty much use any sort of tart baking apple you wanted to. One of my favorite things to do when I was a kid was to see if you could get the entire apple or potato peel off in one go. So of course I can't help myself, but try to do it now. I was so close! Then we just want to cut our apples into nice small pieces. And I'm just gonna toss them in a little bit of sugar and a little sprinkle of cinnamon. I'm just gonna toss my apples in this mixture, and then it is time to pull this all together. That smells so good. Now, to make this loaf, of course, we are starting with a loaf pan. I've got a non-stick one here, which I love, and I've gone ahead and greased it really liberally as well because it's a real pet peeve of mine when baked goods stick. So, I really wanna make sure that does not happen. I'm gonna go ahead and transfer half of my batter into the bottom of my loaf pan, and then I'll just spread it out into an even layer. We're gonna be doing this in 2 layers. So the first layer is going to be batter. Next is going to be adding my apples on top. So these are my sweet cinnamon sugar apples, and I'm gonna go ahead and put a full layer right on top. And then on top of that, we're gonna layer in our brown sugar cinnamon mixture. And then we're gonna do the very same thing on top. So batter, apples, cinnamon sugar. And then the final step, just to get this sort of marbled texture, is just to go in with a knife or a spoon, and you just wanna give it a bit of a zhuzh. That's what I would call that. That's the technical term for this in cooking, a zhuzh. You wanna sort of make sure that your apples, your dough, and your cinnamon layer are gonna have a nice sort of swirl effect. You can't tell me you're not excited for this, right? finish with my final sprinkle of cinnamon. And then get this into the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 60 minutes. Don't worry about the long cooking time. You wanna make sure that this gets fully cooked through, those apples get nice and soft. You'll know your loaf is ready if you stick a toothpick into the center and it comes out clean. Now, while that loaf is baking, we're going to work on the final addition to this amazing apple fritter loaf, and that is our glaze. So this is the yummy, sugary glaze that's going to be drizzled on top when our loaf comes out of the oven. Now, in my bowl, I just have a little bit of powdered sugar, and to that, I'm going to add some cream. But I wanna add it just a couple teaspoons at a time to make sure I get the right consistency. You can either make a really sort of loose glaze, like the kind that would go over a donut and sort of coats everything, or you can make a drizzle glaze. So that's something that's a little thicker and it's gonna hold up on top of the loaf. So I've got my glaze in a nice consistency. It's ready for when this yumminess comes out of the oven. Oh my gosh. The top is the perfect golden color. It's got this beautiful texture that totally looks like an apple fritter. And the hardest part now is allowing it to cool completely before adding your drizzle and serving it up. Oh, I am salivating, I cannot wait. Once that loaf has been amply glazed, you are ready to dive in. And I promise you guys, the flavors will not disappoint. This is basically the epitome of fall. It's perfect served with a big glass of milk or a hot cup of coffee. And honestly, it's so tender and flavorful, everyone will be begging for seconds and thirds. Oh my gosh. It's divine. It's absolute perfection. It's sweet and soft. It's got beautiful apple flavor. There is so much to love. I hope you will give it a try for yourselves. If you do, be sure to tweet me, Instagram me, or Facebook me a photo. You know how much I love seeing your kitchen creations. Remember, this recipe, like all of my recipes, is featured on thedomesticgeek.com. You can find it there. Thank you guys, as always, so much for watching. And finally, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe because there is lots more deliciousness where this came from.